Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the SOM TV podcast. My name is Jason Wise. On today's episode, I'm going to speak with Xander Soren, a winemaker who has set a really lofty goal here. He makes wines that are meant to pair with Japanese cuisine. He makes some really stunning Pinots, and it's a really eye-opening experience tasting all these wines. He also is the former director of music apps over at Apple. He invented things like GarageBand. He's got a crazy story. Before I talk to him about his career and his wines, I want to remind everybody we have a new film coming. Ghost of Napa Valley, and it's going in theaters starting September 3rd in Napa Valley. These will be the very first screenings. Go to somfilms.com to grab a ticket for that, and then keep an eye out because it's going to open in Los Angeles and other places as well. And then go to SOM TV on October 11th. Very excited to show you this movie right in time for Halloween. Without further ado, my conversation with Xander Soren. Xander, it's an honor to have you on. I appreciate your time very much. You're a fascinating guy for me, particularly because there's a Drink a Bottle on SOM TV, and Kyle MacLachlan and Joel McHale, they chose a bunch of wines to drink, and one of the wines that they chose was this particular wine. It was a 2015 Pinot Noir from the Central Coast, and Joel raved about this wine.
I've only had this once.
Really?
And this is called Xander Soren.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's terrific.
Okay.
And I recommend it.
Okay. Well, should we open it?
Let's open it.
You want to do it?
He talked about how it was one he really wanted me to taste. And I was like, really? Okay. And so you entered my world in a way that was very unexpected. Then I come to find out that you are one of the originators in tech and things that are now just sort of taken for granted. I want to get into your whole story of how you kind of got into wine, but why don't we start really fast with how the hell did you meet Joel McHale? Sounds like a very strange way to start the podcast, but it's interesting to me.
No, that was a really fun one. And I would say this is during what I would call the pre-launch hobbyist part of my wine journey, where I was making wine. I was running it by lots of people in the industry for feedback. And this is kind of peak pandemic. So everything's outside, everything's very distanced. I was dining with Chef Rodney Wages. So I was there with a bottle of my 2015, which is one of my favorite kind of go-to. If I have to introduce my wines to somebody, that's the one that I pull out. And I kind of look across to the next table and I see a very striking man, that's like, wow, that guy's really handsome and rugged. And I didn't recognize right away that it was Joel McHale.
Is this Joel McHale, handsome and rugged? First of all, he would laugh very hard. I love that. That's pretty funny. He
had a beard. He had kind of a different haircut. And I was kind of looking, I'm like, wait, that is somebody. And then one of the Soms came over and I was like, is that Joel McHale? And they're like, yeah, it is. And I worked at Apple for many, many years, working with a lot of musicians and artists. My number one rule in the world is when you see anybody of note out in public, leave them alone. It's like everyone wants to just get in there like, oh my God, let's go talk to them. My thing is leave them alone. But I saw they had a whole bunch of Pinots on their table. So there was clearly a wine focus. And we were kind of winding down our dinner. And I was I had a third of the bottle left. And so I went to Ryan and I said, hey, do you want to, send this over to Joel? He's like, sure. And then 45 minutes later, he comes up to the table and just immediately goes to me. He's like, Xander, he's like, I normally don't like California Pinots, but your wine is amazing. Where can I buy it? So the answer there was well, I'm not selling it yet, but thank you. But I'll tell you what, let's exchange information. I'll hook you up with some. It's just hey, this is a really cool guy. He appreciates wine. He's saying nice things about it. So we exchanged information. I sent him some bottles. And then one day I remember just waking up really, really groggy. And I was looking at my laptop and there was this email that came in from him and it said a few things and there was a link. And I'm like, wait, what? And then I saw it was a link to SOM TV. And I know the brand from both being a subscriber and also loving the SOM movies. So I click on it and I'm starting to go through. I'm like, what? Why is he sending what is this? And then there's a part of the segment where he pulls out a bottle of, one of the bottles that I sent him. And so all this time he was secretly working on a wine show without telling me. And then the incredible honor of, pulling out this wine that I've only made 50 cases of. And, I love the story, one, that he loved it. And then he's like, yeah, good luck finding it.
Yeah,
was one
exactly.
Of his, yeah. But it was, it was really, really fun.
It was an interesting thing because to make Pinot in California that is at a level like this is not easy. It's a very, I want to get into sort of how you pulled that off, but But it's funny that I found out about your wine through Joel McHale, most random thing in the world. Now, of course, you and I've got to know each other, and there's more to that. I want to talk a little bit about your history. So for people who don't know who you are, they may have heard of something like GarageBand.
I'd like to invite Xander Soren, who's our Director of Music Marketing, to do that right now. Xander, all yours.
Morning. Thrilled to be able to show you GarageBand running on an iPad. This is really cool.
An app that you have on your Mac. I want you to talk really quick how the hell you ended up creating a piece of software that is now just everywhere. I mean, it is something that exists on every computer that if you have a Mac, how did that, and then how the hell did that transition into wine?
It started with Apple as a teenager. Like I was a teenage fanboy around Apple. I was one of the first people in our neighborhood to own the original Mac in 1984. So I'm 13 years old. That thing changed my life. I was in Madison, Wisconsin, and I was like, again, lifelong Mac guy. And I turned to the dark side a little bit because it was a good paying job working on music software, early MP3 jukeboxes, but for a Windows-based company. So I'd been working there kind of like, I'd rather be doing this on a Mac, but this is the best. This is a pretty cool job for Madison, Wisconsin. That company kind of downsized during the whole like .com excitement and then, collapse. And it happened at a time where I was also an entrepreneur and I'd work on some different projects where Apple was one of my clients. So I had a contact there and I got on somebody's radar. And then they realized like, hey, here's a guy who is a total Apple fanboy. He's worked on musician technologies, but also MP3 jukeboxes. And that got me on radar and they recruited me and they moved me from Madison, Wisconsin out to California. So that started a 21-year career where the first couple of years were like right in the heart of the storm, where it's like early days of iTunes, launching the first iPod, but also a very entrepreneurial time where we were set up as a group intentionally to be a little bit of an incubator. Like, hey, people have ideas, just throw them, let's try it. And my thing was like, hey, wouldn't it be cool to create something for musicians? So I'm sure that a lot of people would have had that idea. I was there at the right time, and it turned into, an acquisition of an incredible German company that, built a program called Logic. And then the foundation of that eventually became GarageBand, and got to partner with, an incredible team of geniuses to develop that, and worked on that for about 20 years.
This is something that it's pretty easy to just go yada, 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 but
Right.
This is a really big deal. I mean, this is at the time when, I was able to edit my first film in my dorm room, on a Mac laptop, which was unheard of. People were using these Avid systems that were gigantic, and we will get to wine, everybody listening. I promise you,
Yeah.
This is a wine podcast. But the important thing with this is all of these things kind of come from other places, especially, back and forth, wine and other things. When you made GarageBand, did you work with Steve Jobs on this process?
Yeah, really closely with them. And that goes back into like the iPod launch, as back then the iTunes product manager, we worked really closely. And then it was, what's the concept of GarageBand? And we all wanted to charge for it. Steve was very adamant that, no, this is going to be free. And strangely, the entire team argued against him, but rightfully he won. And, you look fast forward today when it's not just the Mac, it's iPhones and iPads. GarageBand has been installed on over 1 billion devices.
That's pretty wild. So when did you get into wine? So at what point were you like, wine is starting to seep into your life?
Yeah. So interestingly, it started back in Madison, Wisconsin. So, Madison is a good old, great college football town where it's like you got beers and brats, and Badgers.
I'm from
And that's
Ohio,
what-
so I know
Yeah.
I know Wisconsin very well.
Beers and
especially in
brats and
college
Badgers.
football.
But I did all those sports bars growing up. But as I stayed there after graduation and was starting to hang out with musicians, there was a cafe called Cafe Momar, where all the cool kids hung out, or the people that recorded at Smart Studios. And it was kind of like a wine bar, jazz bar, kind of emerging cocktail culture that was getting popular again in the 90s. So that was my first introduction to feeling a little fancy, drinking a good glass of Pinot. I think in retrospect, it'd probably been an average glass of Pinot. I don't even remember what I was drinking, but Pinot was one of my favorites that I'd be drinking. And then an interesting exodus happened kind of in the mid to late 90s, is that all of my friends, and there's a group of 30 people, we all started moving out to the Bay Area, and we all already liked wine. And now we're like, holy crap. So instead of being stuck inside during these brutal winters, we can drive up to Napa and Sonoma and do wine tasting. So it switched to like something that was of interest became just a culture that we were surrounded by. So that was kind of part one of it. And then a couple of my friends who kind of had the bug and they were making craft beer in their bathrooms and in Madison and winning competitions for their coffee stout. They created a winery, first starting in a custom crush. It's Chad Richard and Bob Zekas. Shout out to Furthermore Wines. But like right out of the gate, they were making some incredible Pinots, just kind of with the help of a custom crush facility that just got better and better within a few years. And after that, they bought their own facility. So it kind of showed me in some ways you've got this, what I later would be working on at Apple, this democratization of technology where you don't have to have a huge video rig or an audio production rig to be able to make a film or make a song. This custom crush movement kind of allowed people to get into it as well. And so I asked them, I said, hey, could I work with you off on the side and do just a little small 25, 50 cases just to kind of dabble into it? And that was the first, and that was probably around, I think my first vintage was 2012, working with just all California Pinots.
That's incredible. It's a really interesting confluence of like access getting greater, but you still have to have the talent. You still have to be able to pull it off kind of thing, which is a fascinating, I would love to do a conversation on what's going wrong right now in regards to that, but that's a different podcast. But when it comes to wine and tech, this is exactly where it meets, that people have access. And if you're any good, the cream's going to rise. What were your first experiences? When you started making wine, did you find was your goal to actually try to make money? Were you just playing with it? Were you just giving it to friends? Because this is a brutal business. This is not for people who don't want to be dirty,
Well, I think even going back, it would be like, well, why make a wine on my own? Like, certainly it's like, hey, my friends are great, making great wine. Why should I make a wine and what style should it be? So enter Japan, and kind of my love of Japan.
Well, we should mention really fast. That part of a lot of your wine is that it's meant to pair with Japanese food. Yep. There's an influence of Japanese culture on it from the label and a number of things. So why Japan and wine? I've had your wines at a very good sushi place in Los Angeles, and I can tell you it pairs very well.
Right.
A lot of wines of this style that have their acid in balance, but also forward and are lighter and are smart with their alcohol content can go very well with fish. It's such a stupid misconception that red wine's not good with, seafood in general. But what was it and how is it that your wine works with Japanese food? I really want to get into like, how do you engineer that? Was this something that you and your winemaker, a very talented woman, did you guys sit down and go, okay, ponzu tastes like this, let's ferment this way? Or like, how do you even start with this conversation?
Before we dive into the how, it's like a little bit of the why, because I have a friend that also worked in like the musical instruments area, and I met him, and he was kind of a foodie, and he was really into French wines. And he's like, I'm going to take you to a place in Kyoto. It's this third generation sushi chef, Otani-san. So the father, the grandfather, all super traditional sushi chefs. Like, you go there, you're going to have like a nice dry sake, and that's the program. And by the way, their sushi restaurant is basically in a residential neighborhood. It's the ground floor of the house. So the third generation guy, Otani-san, he also became enamored with French wines. And so he'd buy really cool bottles to bring them back. And so he developed an entire sushi restaurant, in the middle of nowhere, basically serving aged French Burgundies and Champagnes with his sushi, which at the time was really new. And we'll kind of fast forward later about like how popular that's become now. But
it's still crazy though. It really is on a wide scale.
Yeah.
It's not like it's like totally accepted now.
Yeah.
That, especially within Japanese culture. So I'm impressed that this started there for you.
Yeah. And I don't know if it was like it was my first experience with it, but like to see that this guy basically really leaned into French wines as a part of this, so much so that he changed the formulation of his rice, like how he vinegars it, what temperature to serve it at, to support French wines. And that meal, I was very, very lucky because he was saving a bottle for my friend Saison, and he busted out a 96 Henri Jaillet Nuit Saint Georges, which is like a total like unicorn bottle. I didn't even know what I was drinking at the time, but it was one of those like the aromatics and the balance and the fact that it already had some age behind it. it was incredible. So the glass in itself was really eye-opening, probably one of the best Pinots I've had. But then to see how that matched the sushi, but didn't overpower it. And I think there's a spectrum of different styles that are made in California. And I think especially during that period, you're going through this riper, everybody's making huge Pinots. They're, high alcohol, really, really rich, fun to drink. Certainly there's a place for that. But you pair that with Japanese food, it's going to completely overpower it.
Oh, yeah.
So that got me a little bit thinking like, well, that's kind of cool. But I live in California and there are beautiful, cool climate vineyards here. There are winemakers that are making much more elegant, light touch, minimal intervention wines. And that's the same as Chaland's style. So when I was making wine, furthermore, we were going through like kind of a number of different vintages and a number of different winemakers. And Chaland was there for a 3-year period of time. And I feel like the wines that we made, including that bottle that you have, that 15, I was like, that's it. That's kind of, and when I would bring that bottle to Japan, in some ways, it's the most expensive business card in the world. So I've got a thing with my name on it that's both nice as a gift, but nice like, oh, you're a 2 Michelin star sushi chef? Hi, I'm Xander Soren, and I can give them the bottle, and it always generates interest. And then I think the other big thing in creating my wines and getting feedback both abroad and in the US is that you've seen this, like anybody that introduces a wine, people are going to be polite to them. You're always gonna be like, oh, it's nice. But so what I would religiously also
I've actually seen it all. I've seen some people be real assholes when someone gives a wine, but I'm on the ground level. So yeah,
I prefer the honest asshole approach. But not everybody does that. Cause if you're trying to make a great product, and again, this comes from, years of working at Apple. It's like the product is the king. Everything needs to be great. And you need honest feedback for that, not polite feedback. So a big part of my program is also doing blind tastings. So if I'm tasting with Soms, I'm throwing a couple of my bottles that I feel good about in with a whole bunch of other ringer bottles that are really well rated, that are well respected, and see how the wines do there. So yeah, so basically I would call this the hobbyist phase of my wine. So I've been making wine from 2012 until 2023 is when I first started selling in Japan. So it was this 10-year period of just kind of casually, very lightly introducing it just for feedback, just making like, hey, I make a California wine, but think about it in a more of a Burgundy style than what you would think of for California. And fortunately, the feedback right out of the gate was really good. And then I also had many vintages where I can see that a wine like 2015 is the one that resonated. And then that's the one to really look at like, well, what do they like about it? Well, it's a 13.8 alcohol wine, so it's going to be a little, lighter on the alcohol side. It's Santa Rita Hills, which now that in itself is that there's an AVA, which I absolutely love, where it's the part of the U.S., West Coast that cuts east-west. So you get these really unique east-west, wind and ocean influence that you don't have in other AVAs. And a lot of times people will say sea spray or saline qualities and sometimes nori, like all these flavors that are really supportive of umami, which Japanese cuisine is built around. So I think kind of like leaning into Santa Rita Hills and that whole saline umami friendly wines, but doing it at a earlier pick date, trying to get the right balance between, vibrant acids, just enough fruit structure, not too much fruit and alcohol, so it's not going to overpower the wine. But at the end of the day, and the other differences are if we get a bunch of fruit from a site with different clones, we don't put them in a single tank and co-ferment them. So every clone is kept individually. They're native fermented individually. They're barreled individually. And we don't have a house barrel. Everything is matched to, hey, I think that site works well with that barrel. That works. So
you guys are nuts.
Yeah,
you guys are nuts. I love it. This is good.
This is where Chaland probably hated me for the first few years of this. But the good news is that like once we kind of got like, okay, now we get it. We know the sites and the clones that we have, and we know our barrel program. So it got a little easier. But very small production. We're making 500, 600 cases per year.
What flavor in Japanese food do you find the most difficult to pair with your wine?
I think the most difficult, if you get overly fishy or marinated flavors, those I find are a little bit tough. So if you look at like salmon roe or ikura, there's some things where like a nice crisp sake would work well with that. And then I always had my perception when you see like first it was whitefish. I'm like, well, you can't do Pinot with whitefish. And then it turns out, yeah, you really can. It works
totally
really well.
can. Absolutely.
Yeah. But then when you get into like the silver bluefish, when you're talking about like the sardine or iwashi, and you're talking about mackerel, saba.
Mackerel, yeah. Mackerel's what I think of when you say that, yeah.
So all of those are very marinated, and I'm always like, okay, let's bring out a little sake chaser for the side.
They're also kind of an oily fish. You have an element of like textural thing with that I think, I don't know. I think a high acid wine actually is interesting with that, but
so that was my preconception, not really being an expert in, an enjoyer of Japanese foods, but not an expert. So going to these incredible sushi restaurants with open-minded sushi chefs that are both, here's our tradition, but traditions are also made to be reevaluated and broken sometimes. They were the ones telling me, like, if I was like, oh, let's bring in a sake for this sardine, like, no, try this one of your wines. Anyway, so they were the ones that taught me, like, no, you can pair them. It was like, it's going into Japan first, not even thinking that anything other than beer or sake could be good. And then having this, the masters tell me like, hey, try this. This is a surprise. And they're learning as they go along as well.
It's such an incredibly fascinating thing to watch. I mean, Japan is, much like some parts of Europe, does not move quickly with their changes and their culture and all of this stuff. So to watch this work, well, how has it gone? I mean, you've released this in Japan. You're now releasing it in the US, if I'm correct, right? Okay,
yeah, so I did several, I think, non-standard or maybe interesting things. First, I made wine for 10 years without selling it. And that was, like we were talking about with Joel McHale, like, where can I get it? I was getting that with Japanese sushi chefs for like 8 years. And I think the answer was like, kind of like, oh, thank you so much. I'm so glad you like it. I'm working on when to release it, but let's keep in touch. So at some point, I decided that I left Apple in fall of 22 and then spring of 23, did my official launch event. And we did it at the Park Hyatt Tokyo, which is, if you're a Lost in Translation fan like I am, just you basically just see my wines at the New York bar where your Scarlett and Bill, were drinking. That was incredible. And then when we actually started selling, it's like out of the gate. So restaurants like or hotels like Aman, Ritz-Carlton, Park Hyatt Tokyo started buying, but then like Sushi Saito and Michelin star chefs. So we started developing just in the first 6 months an incredible list of just chefs and somms that have supported me and the program, which was incredibly humbling, to see that.
Well, so how the hell do people get your wines here? I mean, is it still, like Joel said, good luck, or can we get them?
No, so actually we did finally launch. So there was a little bit of like, let's do something fun and let's show Japan that this was the intention of why I did the wine. So we did year one there. And a couple months ago, we did the launch in the US and we had a couple fun events, both at Single Thread Farms up here in Healdsburg and then Naka in LA. So, if you go to Single Thread or Naka today, my wines are going to be on their list and in some cases by the glass. So it's nice to get, again, the support from 3 Michelin star chefs overseas and 3 Michelin star chefs in the US.
I will say I wish that this wine, I had known about it when we did Som 3. We had a lot of Pinots from around the world in that competition, quote unquote, and in Paris and all that stuff. And this is that kind of level. So I'm blown away. I am hoping that I could keep kissing your ass and you'll keep sending me wine. That's my goal here.
I really appreciate it. You don't have to kiss my ass because I've been watching all your movies. And I also want to say that, we had sushi together last month and we talked about a few different topics from Kurosawa Ron. We talked about Cup of Salvation. So I went and I rewatched Ron, which I do once every 1 or 2 years, and I watched Cup of Salvation for the first time, and oh my god,
very similar things, like equal films, basically.
Equal film. No. Let's call it though. It's like when I watched that, I saw the Kurosawa influence because I think the cinematography is amazing, and when you get into these like sweeping vistas of just the beautiful sights that you visited in these exotic places, I saw it reminded me of those kind of the titles at the beginning of Ron when you've got these windy hills and the horses are all facing different directions. I mean, and then some of the mountains, both in Armenia and Persia. That was
in
really,
Iran,
really
yeah.
amazing. Yeah.
Well, that's a compliment I'm not sure I deserve, but I will tell you that means a lot. Ron is I think the best film ever made. I've said it many times. And I really, Cup of Salvation was most dangerous, hardest son of a bitch film I ever did too. And I'm so proud that we made it. So that means a lot, Xander. I appreciate it. Well, so where can people get your wine? You might as well just at least plug it.
Yeah, so I will say that, the best place is go straight to my website. So Xander Soren Wines, it's Xander with an X. There is a kind of a little bit of a membership application process that you go through, but I'll tell all the listeners, if you put XSW, which stands for Excess Wines, XSW VIP into the membership code, it'll just bypass that, so you'll get auto accepted, and that lets you see the store and hope people find things that they like and see.
Well, Xander, the wines are fantastic. I really appreciate it. It's really, really great stuff. All right. Well,
thank you so much.
I look forward to in 10 years when I can buy this wine easily. All right. Behave yourself.
All right. Thanks, Jason.
I want to thank everybody for listening to today's podcast. Thank you to Xander Soren and our producer, John Adams. And thank you for listening and giving us a great review if you love this podcast, wherever you listen. Don't forget, Ghosts of Napa Valley is coming September 3rd to theaters in Napa, and then we'll be in Los Angeles, and then October 11th on Som TV. So somfilms.com for those tickets, and somtv.com for Som TV. We really enjoy having you listening, and we appreciate it so much. Drink something great. See you next week.